Mark, is there anything you want to say to the people of Indianapolis?
Word is, moments after being brought into court for the brutal attack that shocked Indianapolis, Mark Sanchez suddenly lost control, lunging toward the truck driver's grieving family in a violent outburst that left the entire courtroom stunned. But what pushed him to the breaking point, and what really happened that night on the highway? The night everything changed. What happens when a celebrated former NFL quarterback and current television analyst finds himself at the center of one of the most shocking and brutal altercations in recent sports history? What transpires when the cameras stop rolling, when the spotlight dims, and when a man who once commanded millions of fans watching from stadiums and living rooms across America becomes the subject of criminal charges, police investigations, and headlines that read more like crime reports than sports coverage? This is a story that begins in the early morning hours of October 4th, 2025. In the heart of Indianapolis, Indiana. A story that involves a parking dispute, a 69-year-old truck driver just trying to do his job, and a confrontation so violent, so unnecessary, and so disturbing that it would leave both men hospitalized, both men scarred, and both men at the center of a legal battle that continues to unfold even as we speak today. Mark Sanchez, the former New York Jets quarterback who once led his team to back-to-back AFC championship games, who played for the University of Southern California Trojans and became a household name in professional football, who transitioned seamlessly into a media career as a Fox Sports analyst and studio contributor, found himself in Indianapolis on that October evening for what should have been a routine weekend of work. He was scheduled to broadcast the Las Vegas Raiders versus Indianapolis Colts game, a standard assignment for someone of his experience and stature in sports media. But instead of preparing for game day, instead of reviewing playbooks and statistics, instead of focusing on the professional responsibilities that had defined his post-playing career, Mark Sanchez would find himself stumbling through the streets of downtown Indianapolis in the middle of the night, exhibiting behavior so erratic, so concerning, and so dangerous that it would ultimately lead to one of the most violent confrontations imaginable. The incident occurred in an alley adjacent to the Westin Hotel in Indianapolis's wholesale district near the Indiana State House at approximately 12:30 a.m. Surveillance footage from the nearby Marriott Downtown Hotel captured Sanchez stumbling erratically through downtown streets for at least 20 minutes prior to the altercation, exhibiting troubling behavior that authorities would later link to possible intoxication or other factors that remain under investigation to this very day. This wasn't just a momentary lapse in judgment, a brief stumble after one too many drinks at a hotel bar. This was sustained, prolonged erratic behavior captured on multiple surveillance cameras from multiple angles, behavior that would later become crucial evidence in the criminal case that would be built against him. But who was on the receiving end of Mark Sanchez's aggression that night? Who was the person whose life would be forever changed by this violent encounter? His name is Perry Toll, and he is a 69-year-old Indiana resident, a working man, a father who would miss his own son's wedding because of his injuries, a truck driver employed by a company that recycles and disposes of commercial cooking oil. Toll had backed his box truck onto the Westin's loading dock to perform his routine job, the unglamorous, necessary work of servicing commercial kitchens, collecting used cooking oil from restaurants and hotels, a service that keeps kitchens running and businesses operating smoothly. It's not glamorous work, it's not the kind of job that puts you in the spotlight or earns you recognition, but it's honest work, it's necessary work, and on this particular night, it was work that would nearly cost Perry Toll his life.
It's late, restaurants close, he comes, does the rounds, basically picking up garbage, which is old grease.
Old grease, not a freaking great job, but apparently this driver, 69, he has hearing aids. They're out because the truck is really, really loud and messing with his ears. So Sanchez, according to police, walks up to the guy's truck in the alley behind the two hotels downtown, opens the guy's truck door, and starts an argument because, hey, you're doing wind sprints at midnight, whatever. The driver says Sanchez was drunk, slurring words, smelled like booze, and it got worse.
According to the probable cause affidavit filed by Indianapolis police, Mark Sanchez approached Perry Toll's truck, opened the driver's door without permission or invitation, and confronted Toll with an aggressive demeanor that immediately put the older man on edge. Sanchez claimed that the hotel manager had prohibited the oil replacement service and insisted that Toll could not park his truck in that location, an assertion that would prove to be completely unfounded, as Toll was performing legitimate work for which he had been contracted and authorized. But more disturbing than the baseless complaint was the manner in which Sanchez delivered it. Tolle described Sanchez as smelling strongly of alcohol, speaking with slurred speech, and behaving in an increasingly aggressive manner that made it clear this was not going to be a simple misunderstanding that could be resolved with a polite conversation and a handshake. The confrontation escalated rapidly and alarmingly. Sanchez allegedly climbed into Tolle's truck uninvited, blocked Tolle from retrieving his cell phone when he attempted to call for help, and physically shoved the 69-year-old man when Tolle tried tried to reach for his phone. Perry Toll, recognizing the danger he was in, attempted to de-escalate the situation in the way that any reasonable person would, by removing himself from the immediate threat. He moved to the opposite loading dock, hoping to flag down security, hoping to get help from someone, anyone who could intervene before this situation spiraled further out of control. But Mark Sanchez followed him. Sanchez pursued the older man to the other loading dock, and once again blocked his access, once again prevented him from calling for help, once again made it abundantly clear that he had no intention of allowing Perry Toll to simply walk away from this confrontation. Feeling threatened, feeling trapped, feeling as though his safety and perhaps even his life were in immediate danger, Perry Toll deployed pepper spray in an attempt to stop Sanchez's aggression. For most people, pepper spray would be enough to end a confrontation. For most people, the burning sensation in their eyes, the difficulty breathing, the overwhelming discomfort would cause them to retreat, to reconsider, to step back and reassess what they were doing. But Mark Sanchez didn't retreat. Despite being pepper sprayed, despite the pain and discomfort that should have stopped him in his tracks, Sanchez continued to advance toward Perry Toll, continued to pursue him, continued to threaten him in a way that made it abundantly clear that this was not going to end unless more drastic measures were taken.
There's a video that shows him chasing the old guy, a 70-year-old guy, grabbing him.
There's a video.
There's a video. We don't have the video, but that's what the cops are saying. There's a video apparently showing that's how they arrested him inside the hospital. They grab him, shove him against the wall by a dumpster. So, and now this is the reports that the guy felt threatened, pepper sprayed Sanchez. Okay, Sanchez keeps coming. The guy stabs him. The 70-year-old stabs Sanchez a bunch of times and says it's self-defense.
It was at this moment, in what Perry Toll would later describe as a life or death situation, that Toll pulled out a knife and stabbed Mark Sanchez multiple times, 2 or 3 times according to the initial reports, because he genuinely believed in that moment that Mark Sanchez was trying to kill him. Toll told police that he thought, this guy is trying to kill me, and felt he was in physical danger that left him with no other choice but to defend himself with whatever means he had available. But the violence didn't end there. Even after being stabbed, even after sustaining wounds that would later require hospitalization and extensive medical treatment, Mark Sanchez had enough strength and enough fury left in him to grab Perry Toll and throw him violently against a dumpster and onto pallets that were stacked on the ground. Toll reported not knowing whether he was being punched, struck with an object, or injured in some other way. He could only see Sanchez's feet approaching him, could only feel the impacts, could only process that he was still under attack, despite having already stabbed his attacker in self-defense. After managing to stand up again, disoriented and injured, Tolle stabbed Sanchez at least one more time before the former quarterback finally retreated. Mark Sanchez fled the scene with what witnesses described as a look of shock on his face, bleeding profusely from multiple stab wounds, stumbling down Indianapolis sidewalks in footage that would later be captured by more surveillance cameras, leaving a trail of blood behind him as he tried to find help, tried to comprehend what had just happened, tried to understand how a night that began with him preparing for a weekend of sports broadcasting had ended with him stabbed multiple times in an alley behind a hotel. Both men would be transported to local hospitals. Both men would receive emergency medical treatment. Both men would begin a long, painful recovery process. And both men would soon find themselves at the center of a criminal investigation that would shock the sports world and raise profound questions about what really happened in that alley on October 4th, 2025. The aftermath and legal reckoning. When Mark Sanchez arrived at Escalation Hospital in Indianapolis in the early morning hours of October 4th, 2025, bleeding from multiple stab wounds to his torso and chest, emergency room staff worked quickly to stabilize him, to assess the extent of his injuries, to ensure that the former NFL quarterback and current Fox Sports analyst would survive what could have been a fatal encounter. The wounds were serious enough that Sanchez was initially in critical condition, serious enough that his family, his friends, and his colleagues at Fox Sports were immediately notified and rushed to be by his side. But while medical professionals focused on saving Mark Sanchez's life, law enforcement officials were simultaneously conducting an investigation that would ultimately reveal a very different story than the one many people initially assumed when they first heard the headline, Mark Sanchez stabbed in Indianapolis.
Yeah, Stephen A., the first time I saw this story, I thought, something doesn't make sense here, because usually the person who is in the hospital with the injuries, the stab wounds as we hear about them, usually that's the person who we consider the victim. But it lends itself to believe in this case, at least in my opinion, that something seriously wrong happened on the front end involving Mark Sanchez's conduct.
On October 5th, 2025, while still hospitalized and recovering from his wounds, Mark Sanchez was arrested by Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department officers. The initial charges filed against him included 3 misdemeanors: battery causing injury, public intoxication, and unlawful entry into a motor vehicle. For many observers, for many fans who had followed Sanchez's career from his days at USC to his time with the New York Jets to his current role in sports broadcasting, these charges were shocking enough. Here was a man who had achieved the American dream, who had gone from college football star to professional athlete to respected media personality, and now he was being charged with crimes that suggested he had been drunk, aggressive, and violent in a public altercation. But the misdemeanor charges, shocking as they were only the beginning of Mark Sanchez's legal troubles. On October 6, 2025, prosecutors upgraded the charges against Mark Sanchez from misdemeanors to a level 5 felony, battery resulting in serious bodily injury. This upgrade came after medical professionals assessed the full extent of Perry Toll's injuries and determined that they were far more severe, far more permanent, and far more life-altering than initially realized. A level 5 felony in Indiana carries a potential sentence of 1 to 6 years in prison, along with substantial fines and other penalties. This was no longer just a case of misdemeanor assault charges that might be resolved with probation, community service, or anger management classes. This was now a serious felony case that could result in Mark Sanchez serving significant prison time if convicted.
Mark Sanchez is seen on tape, on footage, staggering and stumbling around with stab wounds to the right side of his chest. So for him to all of a sudden have misdemeanor charges upgraded to a felony, it must be, I mean, they must have staggering evidence against him to make that kind of assertion. Even though he's hospitalized with stab wounds, they still saying we're charging you with the felonies and we're not charging the other guy with anything.
But what exactly were the injuries that Perry Toll sustained during this brutal altercation? Injuries that were severe enough to warrant upgrading charges to a felony level? According to medical reports and court documents filed, in Marion County, Perry Toll suffered a severe facial laceration so deep and so extensive that it penetrated through his cheek all the way to his tongue. This wasn't a superficial cut, a minor wound that would heal with a few stitches and some antibacterial ointment. This was a catastrophic injury that would leave permanent disfigurement to Toll's head, jaw, and neck area, permanent scarring that would serve as a daily reminder of the violence he experienced that night in the alley behind the Westin Hotel.
So Sanchez goes in the hospital with stab wounds, upper body, stable condition. He was in critical condition for a minute. And the old guy walks in with a cut in his face. Can we show, guys, look at what the altercation with Sanchez. Look at what this, imagine your grandfather is trying to do a grease truck. That's
not a cut. He's gashed from his.
Look, by the way,
Sanchez had a knife, or this guy had a knife?
This guy had a knife, but for what it looks like, Sanchez might have gotten a hold of it because he stabbed him so hard it went through his cheek and cut his tongue.
Photographs of Perry Toll's injuries that were shared with media outlets and his family show a man wearing a neck brace, his face covered in deep wounds, bruising and swelling, that paint a vivid, disturbing picture of just how violent this encounter truly was. The severity of the wound affected Tolley's ability to speak properly, caused him significant pain and discomfort that would last for weeks or even months, and created swelling that required extensive medical monitoring and treatment. Perhaps most heartbreaking of all, these injuries were so serious that Perry Toll missed his own son's wedding, a milestone family moment that he had undoubtedly looked forward to for years, a celebration that should have been one of the happiest days of his life, replaced instead by recovery in a hospital bed and consultations with attorneys about both criminal proceedings and civil litigation. Perry Toll's attorney, Eric May, stated publicly that his client is thankful to be alive, but remains shaken up mentally from the ordeal. When family members spoke to media representatives in the days following the attack, they were cautious, measured, and clearly overwhelmed by the attention and the trauma. "He's okay. We are talking to lawyers first," they said, a statement that suggests not only concern for Perry Toll's physical recovery, but also recognition that this case would involve complex legal proceedings, both criminal and civil, that would require expert guidance and careful navigation through the American justice system. Mark Sanchez posted a bond of just $300, a surprisingly low amount given the severity of the charges, after his release from the hospital, and was subsequently transferred to the Marion County Jail for processing before being released to await trial. On October 22, 2025, a pretrial conference was held that lasted approximately 2.5 minutes. Sanchez, who was not legally required to attend this particular hearing, appeared remotely from California and entered a plea of not guilty to all charges. The trial date has been set for December 11th, 2025, a date that will undoubtedly be marked on the calendars of sports media members, legal observers, and anyone who has followed this shocking case from its inception. Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears has been vocal in his condemnation of the incident, calling it an unnecessary escalation over something as trivial as a parking dispute. Mears stated publicly, "This was a situation that did not need to occur, fighting over a parking space, a sentiment that resonates with anyone who has ever dealt with minor frustrations in daily life, but managed to keep their emotions in check, managed to resolve disputes without resorting to violence, managed to remember that other human beings deserve respect and dignity, regardless of how frustrated or angry we might feel in the moment."
Recognizable in something like this.
In a statement, Marion County Prosecutor Ryan Mears condemned the incident, adding in part, what began as a disagreement between a 38-year-old former professional athlete and a 69-year-old man should not have escalated into violence.
The investigation is ongoing, and one particularly significant aspect involves drug and alcohol testing of Mark Sanchez. The results of these tests remain pending as of this recording, but they could prove crucial in determining not only what was happening chemically in Sanchez's system during the altercation, but also potentially in understanding why a successful sports analyst would behave in such an erratic, aggressive, and ultimately self-destructive manner. The surveillance footage showing Sanchez stumbling through downtown Indianapolis for more than 20 minutes before the altercation, combined with Perry Toll's testimony about smelling alcohol on Sanchez's breath and hearing him slur his words, paints a picture of someone who was clearly not in full control of their faculties, someone who was impaired to the point where their judgment was severely compromised. Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department Chief Chris Bailey has emphasized that investigators have access to surveillance footage from multiple angles and have interviewed numerous witnesses who were in the area during the early morning hours of October 4th. This evidence, combined with the physical injuries sustained by both parties and the statements given by Perry Toll and Mark Sanchez to investigating officers, has led prosecutors to conclude that the evidence strongly suggests Sanchez was the aggressor in this encounter, that Perry Toll acted in legitimate self-defense, and that the charges filed against the former quarterback are appropriate given the circumstances. But the legal troubles facing Mark Sanchez don't end with the criminal charges filed by the Marion County Prosecutor's Office. Perry Toll has also filed a civil lawsuit against both Mark Sanchez and Fox Sports, seeking substantial damages for the severe permanent disfigurement to his head, jaw, and neck, as well as for the emotional trauma, the missed work, the medical expenses, and all the other ways in which this violent encounter has forever altered the course of Perry Toll's life. The civil suit includes allegations of negligent hiring against Fox Sports, suggesting that the network should have been aware of potential issues or red flags that might have indicated Mark Sanchez posed a risk to public safety when sent on assignment to Indianapolis. The human cost. When Mark Sanchez finally spoke publicly, for the first time since being stabbed, since being arrested, since having his entire life turned upside down by one night of poor decisions and violent behavior, his words were brief, carefully chosen, and notably absent of any detailed explanation about what actually happened in that alley behind the Westin Hotel in Indianapolis. Standing outside what appeared to be a courthouse or legal building, with reporters crowding around him with microphones and cameras, with questions being shouted from multiple directions, Sanchez offered only the most basic, most generic statements that his legal team had undoubtedly advised him were safe to make without potentially incriminating himself or jeopardizing his defense strategy.
Mark, is there anything you want to say to the people of Indianapolis?
Right now I'm just focused on my recovery, and I just wanted to thank the first responders, Escalation Hospital. I'm sorry, you're going to hit something. Marion County Sheriff and the Indianapolis Police Department, Metro PD. But I'm focused on my recovery, and I want to see my wife, I want to see my son, my 2 baby girls. There'll be a day to answer all these questions, and unfortunately, today is not that day.
Sanchez thanked the first responders, the medical staff at Escalation Hospital, the Marion County Sheriff's Department, and the Indianapolis Metropolitan Police Department, standard, appropriate acknowledgments for people who had responded to the incident and provided medical care. He emphasized his focus on recovery and his desire to be with his family, his wife Perry Matfeld, his son Daniel, and his twin daughters.
Anything you want to say to Mr. Toll?
I guess the real thing here is I just want to thank Dr. Mossler, the surgeon. She saved my life. So I'm grateful for that. Sorry I can't answer all your questions.
Feeling any better?
Thank you, guys.
Recovering slowly now.
Sure you can. Thank you.
Sanchez's brother, Nick Sanchez, released a statement on October 6th that was similarly brief and focused on medical recovery rather than the circumstances of the incident itself. Mark remains under medical care for the serious injuries, focused on his recovery. This statement, like Mark's own public comments, carefully avoided any admission of wrongdoing, any detailed explanation of what happened, any expression of remorse or accountability that might be used against him in either the criminal proceedings or the civil lawsuit that he now faces. When detectives interviewed Mark Sanchez in the hospital about what happened, he claimed to remember very little about the incident, stating that he only recalled grabbing for a window and did not know the who, what, or where of what had occurred. This claim of memory loss is not uncommon in cases involving alleged intoxication or head trauma, but it also conveniently allows Sanchez to avoid making potentially incriminating statements while simultaneously leaving the door open for his defense team to argue that he was not in control of his actions, that he didn't understand what was happening, that he should not be held fully accountable because he cannot even recall the events in question. The impact on Mark Sanchez's professional life has been immediate and significant. He was scheduled to broadcast the Raiders-Colts game on Sunday, October 6th, but Fox Sports pulled him from that assignment, replacing him with former NFL quarterback Brady Quinn. Fox Sports released a carefully worded statement expressing their thoughts for Sanchez during his recovery, but notably did not comment on his continued employment status or address the civil lawsuit allegations that they were negligent in hiring him or supervising his conduct while on assignment. The network finds itself in a difficult position. Mark Sanchez is a known personality, someone with name recognition and credibility in the sports broadcasting world, but he is also now a defendant in both criminal and civil cases that involve allegations of drunken violence against a senior citizen who is simply trying to do his job.
A plea deal could be anywhere from no prison time, severe fines, different other kinds of penalties, to some sort of prison time. But this is not the highest degree of a felony for a battery in the state. So this is not something where essentially we're talking years and years and years in prison. So I think there is room, and again, we don't have all the evidence, but just looking at it from the outside looking in, there's room for Mark Sanchez and his lawyers as this thing goes through the process in the coming weeks to say, hey, what can we do to establish a plea?
Legal experts who have analyzed the case suggest that Mark Sanchez's best strategy may be to pursue a plea deal rather than go to trial. While a level 5 felony battery charge carries a potential sentence of 1 to 6 years in prison, prosecutors and defense attorneys often negotiate plea agreements that can result in reduced charges, probation instead of incarceration, substantial fines, mandatory counseling or rehabilitation programs, and other alternatives to lengthy prison sentences. For someone in Mark Sanchez's position, a public figure with significant financial resources, a previously clean record aside from a 2006 incident at USC, and a family depending on him, the prospect of a plea deal that allows him to avoid prison time would undoubtedly be attractive, even if it means admitting guilt, paying substantial compensation to Perry Toll, and potentially ending his broadcasting career.
Their goal is going to be no jail time. That's number one. But the biggest goal outside of that, Stephen A., is to get this case over with, because the more we talk about it, the more damage there is to his reputation, the more this whole perspective changes, the more information comes out about what happened. And all of that is potentially harmful, not just to this case for Mark Sanchez, but to his life going forward.
The contrast between Mark Sanchez's career accomplishments and this shocking incident could not be more stark. Here is a man who threw for over 15,000 yards in his NFL career, who completed nearly 60% of his passes, who led the New York Jets to back-to-back AFC championship games in his first 2 seasons, something that very few rookie quarterbacks in NFL history have ever accomplished. Here is someone who played for the University of Southern California, one of college football's most prestigious programs, who was drafted in the first round of the NFL draft, who played for multiple teams over nearly a decade in professional football, who successfully transitioned from player to analyst, who seemed to have his post-playing career figured out and on track. Mark Sanchez has also been known for his philanthropic work, including serving as an ambassador for inner-city games, working with Tuesday's Children to support families affected by the September 11th attacks, advocating for the Juvenile Diabetes Research Foundation, and participating in disaster relief efforts, including Hurricane Sandy cleanup. These are not the actions of someone who appears to be a danger to society, not the resume of someone who seems likely to violently assault a senior citizen in an alley over a parking dispute. This disconnect between Sanchez's public persona and charitable work and the allegations of violent drunken aggression has left many observers confused, concerned, and wondering what could possibly explain such a dramatic departure from the person he has presented himself to be throughout his professional career. Some commentators and analysts have suggested that this incident, if the allegations are proven true, indicates that Mark Sanchez may be dealing with substance abuse issues, mental health challenges, or other personal problems that have not been publicly acknowledged or addressed. Click on one of T cards on your screen to see more videos like this.